All right, my dears, Daniela here. Welcome to the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. This is an episode that we've never done before. I have my very handsome husband joining me. He is going to talk to us all about computer security, computer hygiene, all the things that we need to know about and be aware of so that we're not getting hacked. And this is such an important business conversation because I'll tell you this story in hopes that it never happens to you. But a spa that I was working at back in Hawaii actually got hacked by an outside organization from another country. They hacked and took over their entire website and put hardcore porn on the website. So if you typed in that spa's name, and, thinking you're going to look for Botox or some type of laser treatment or something like that, there was very graphic, like not just girls with their shirts off, like hardcore porn on that website. And the country was requesting or demanding $20,000 to give their domain back. So to go through the changing the password domain, making sure that everything is secure. Also, the fact that, this website didn't have any patient information on it, but like, imagine what would happen if there was a HIPAA violation or something along those lines. So that's an extreme example of what can happen to anybody and why this is so important to really understand password management, access, and even simple things like, is your website secure? What are we doing to make sure that we're backing up that information? So I used to think that I was really good at that until I met my husband, and he taught me so much about why passwords matter, taught me about some different software. So I wanted to bring him on to have this conversation and share with you guys. So Kyle, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so let's start with the easiest thing first. Like, why can't you use the same password over and over again?
Well, a good example is your website having a ransom demand with pornography as the result of perhaps not strong enough passwords or perhaps using a password in more than one place and maybe vulnerable to being intercepted someplace else. And if you're using it for all of your places, then you've basically given the key away. You wouldn't necessarily have the same key to your front door of your house and your car, and maybe you're safe at a bank. So why would you do that with your electronic keys?
So when we're hearing like, this big business or Facebook got hacked or, the bank got hacked or these big breaches, and you get a notification that says your data may have been included in this. Do you know what I'm talking about? What are those called?
Well, first, if you're getting a notification like that, you want to make sure it's authentic, right? So there's a very good chance that somebody is using that to try to get from you credentials or other personal information that they can then use to be one step closer to actually hacking you. So step one with any sort of contact out of the blue is to verify that it's authentic. And that goes for your banks, your credit cards, your any sort of password managers, anything that's sensitive to you. You should have a secure means to communicate with that organization and another way to authenticate. But there are also companies out there that can help you look into those things and keep your digital life secure.
So if I get an email like that from, like Home Depot, I think Home Depot was one of the big companies that was hacked. I'm not sure if that was exactly them, but if I got an email from them, what am I looking at to know if it's a secure email?
Well, there's nothing that's really secure about an email unless you have the capability of digitally signing emails and even encrypting emails. And that requires a form of handshake between two parties. And a lot of people don't go that far with their email setup. So secure and email usually are not a thing. There are ways to set that up with companies, but most companies, at least in this world, don't go that far. But if you do receive some sort of communication like that, you can look for all sorts of things that may be red flags, misspelled words. If it's from Home Depot, but it's misspelled Home Depot, or it's .com something else, or there's something odd in the actual email address, that's a very good first indicator. And a healthy amount of paranoia is always good. So just assume it's not legitimate, and find a third party or another way that you may be able to authenticate the information.
Okay. So in the world that we live in today, where for me running an online company, we have I probably 60 different softwares that we're using, some free, some paid. How are you keeping track of passwords, and what makes a good password?
So for the second part of your question, what makes a good password? There's some websites will have minimum requirements of so many characters, or you have to have so many numbers, or not use dictionary words, some good hygiene in there. Others say that you can only use letters and numbers, for example. So you may be constrained in what you can make as your password. But with whatever characters you're allowed to use, longer is generally better in the password world. Not using dictionary words is good. And by that, I mean,
don't use your kid's name and their birthday.
That's right. If you can find the word in the dictionary, even with something that you thought was a good trick 10 years ago, like switching S's with dollar signs and I's with exclamation points and all these sorts of things, it's very easy to crack those these days. So stay away from it. My recommendation would be to use a random password generator. You can pick the number of characters and what sort of symbols or letters or combinations you want to allow, and just let the computer come up with something random and copy that and use that as your password. To the first part of your question, there's all sorts of password management tools out there, and those tend to be convenient, but the key to making them convenient and secure is ensuring that you have a way to lock down your vault of passwords. You will have one password to rule them all. And the last thing you want to do is make your password your pet's name into the vault. And then all of a sudden, all of your very, very secure passwords were protected with something extremely weak. Mm-hmm. And you've in fact just opened the door more easily to folks. So to the first part of your question, using a password manager, and there's many available products out there, many are free, is a very good first step. And then ensuring that you use the most secure password on each site and have a different password for each site is a very good second step. Ensuring that your password manager has a very good secure password to get into the vault is a good third step. I would caution away from, at least my personal preference, I'd caution away from using password managers that are also associated with your email account or social media, or if a party is offering to do these things for you and it's already connected to one of your accounts. That,
like when it says log in with Facebook or log in with,
that's
like,
different. That's different. I'm saying that some web browsers, for example, offer to store all of your credentials inside the web browser. My personal preference is to have a third party vault system to store passwords. I suppose you could look at using browsers if you want, but my personal preference is to go with a third party software.
We use a software called LastPass in our company, and it has a Chrome extension. So you can just put it up on your browser so that you always can have access, and it can help you generate a secure password. And we have them all stored in there. We can also share our passwords. So right now, I believe we have about 17 people on our team, and not one person has the actual password to any of our accounts. They are shared access, which makes onboarding and offboarding in a company much easier, because when we're onboarding somebody, one of the things that you taught me as well is, like, even if you have this really long, secure password, you still need to change it from time to time. And so going in and updating that to some other insanely long password is a great thing. And using LastPass, there's 1Password. There's a lot of different ones. So look around and decide which one fits you best. But having those and then regularly updating, we try and do ours quarterly, go through and select a new password, have that changed. We don't have to change any of the access with our people. It's all just automatically done for them.
Yeah. So a couple things. First, probably don't want folks out in the world to know how often a particular business changes their passwords.
Oh, okay. So now we're going to change that.
And second, another nice feature of what you do in what you just described is you have the ability to revoke credentials from someone. So let's say that some other company had an employee that was using a system similar to yours, because of course you only have awesome people working in your company. But let's say that another company had a similar setup and an employee departed, and maybe not on the best of terms. It's easy to quickly revoke all access that they had to things that are important to your company. And then you don't have to worry about anything nefarious necessarily happening as that person is exiting the company.
Yeah. And we also have one big spreadsheet that's called our team access spreadsheet. And it'll put, it has listed out all of the softwares and then who has access to what, so that it does make that you can search via email and it'll pull the software that we use, pulls it all up and you can just go revoke, which whether they're leaving on good or bad terms, it just still makes it a lot easier for that offboarding process.
I think what you're saying is you're searching a spreadsheet by email address is the lookup. You're not searching through email.
Yeah, email address. Yeah. Okay, so we understand that about passwords. When we're talking about the importance of backing up your website or backing up any important information, talk to me about that. Like, what is a good standard? Why are we backing stuff up?
Sure. So and there may be a difference between personal preference for files in your personal life and preferences for your company. So you need to also look through the lens of what's most appropriate. For companies, there may be statutory or other legal requirements on how often you have to have things backed up. So, first make sure you're checking with anybody that may be able to help you there. But you also don't want to be in a situation, for example, you mentioned the unfortunate incident with the other spa who had their website hacked. Imagine that you had other files that may have been corrupted and not just a website, your entire practice, for example. Imagine if somebody, and this is a real problem these days, if somebody accesses those and encrypts them and doesn't want to give you the encryption password. And we see that sort of ransoming happening all the time too, where they ask you to pay a large sum of money to get the password to access your own files. So if you have a backup of your files, that's a very good way to not prevent that from happening to you, but mitigate the consequences of it happening to you. So that's probably a personal preference on how often that is. Is it hourly? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly, quarterly? And there's services that can do that. And that brings up another decision point is, are you going to do it locally? So am I doing that something at the point of business in your house, in your office, for example, or you have a third party that's doing this remotely and you never see it, it's in the cloud, if you will. And there's nothing wrong with doing both. So there may be an opportunity for you to make sure all of your files are put someplace secure and you have a physical copy of that, whether it's on a USB drive or some alternative media. And there's also ways to have that backed up to the cloud. Some of that, again, may have some sort of statutory limitations on how you can store or transmit PII, for example, or personal health information or other sorts of data. So you definitely want to be careful that you're compliant with any rules, but you also want to ensure that you have enough backup.
How secure? I know everything potentially could get hacked, but how secure, how much peace should you have if you're just backing stuff up in the cloud versus backing it up because what is the cloud? Is the cloud something that Apple is managing or Google is managing or Facebook is managing, or is it something that we can, do we need to have it on an external hard drive somewhere?
Yeah. So it's when people use the term cloud, it's generally an abstract term for something that's done, one, remotely, and two, usually by a third party. So it could be any company that you've entered a service agreement with, and they are not physically located at your home or your office. So they are remote and they're not you. And that tends to be what we refer to by the word cloud. You can also, in some of those services, you can actually just download your data directly from them. So you don't have to worry about how to do that. For individual files, for example, you can just create a backup, and whether you choose to have a low level of paranoia or a high level of paranoia is probably a personal preference, but you can imagine everything on the scale of, just putting it on your local computer to saving a copy on some physical media and putting in a safe deposit box.
So I'm thinking of another example of a spa owner that I know. It was a really, really challenging week for him. This was about a year ago, but his spa software, the company that he uses, they got hacked and the whole thing was shut down. And that caused all of the appointments to be disappeared from the schedule. So this individual spa owner had lost thousands of dollars. They didn't know who was scheduled at what time. All of that, and that software was down for over a week. If that would have been backed up locally, this spa owner would have been able to see the schedule, right? Would they have been able, or is what we're backing up the actual patient data?
What the situation you just described sounds like they're using a third-party software to manage scheduling. And then at that point, you're somewhat at the mercy of what that third-party software allows you to do. They may not allow you to download any data locally. They may say that for their terms of service, everything's handled with them, in which case you don't have many options. When you have a third-party software like that, often entirely online, there's a lot of convenience. It's often public-facing, and your patients or clients can book directly and have all sorts of convenient features. But you also lose some of the ability to hold the details close and keep that information to yourself. So a situation like that, depending on the third-party software, may not be avoidable and may not have a means of extracting the data you want unless the terms of service and the third-party software interface actually allow it. If they do allow it, that would be a good place for business hygiene to perhaps set up a daily or weekly download of appointments to ensure that you do have the capability. It may not be user friendly, but you may have the capability to at least know who is scheduled for today and call them and let them know what's going on, or even continue to see the patients that were originally scheduled.
Yeah. And that is how, like, seeing an example like that, seeing the example of the spa website that was hacked, that translates to dollars lost in your business by not taking these steps. So it can seem like an inconvenience. I know for me, because you have everything set up with authenticators. So it's not only the really long password, but then I also am having to authenticate it.
Yeah.
And it can feel like such a burden of time. But what we have to remember as business owners is that extra 30 seconds that it takes you to authenticate it is protecting you from having something like this happen. So can you go into authenticators?
Sure. And that's another area that's super important. So strong passwords are great, but it's good to have both a belt and suspenders approach to a lot of these things. And so the authenticator or some other sort of two-factor authentication is usually what you hear is you generally have two different things that need to be validated or authenticated before access is granted. And it tends to be some combination of something something you have, or something you are. And something is generally a password or a phrase or something like that. Something you have, maybe a physical key that like a USB key that you can plug into your computer and that authenticates you. Or it could be a rolling numeric code that's either on your phone or a device that your company issues. And something that you are, the third type, tends to be biometrics. So an eye scan or a fingerprint scan or something that is intended to be unique to the individual, although there are ways to copy those and they're not entirely foolproof.
Okay. In wrapping up, I want to talk about cameras. and Wi-Fi. I know that, you're always very cautious of anything Wi-Fi enabled in the house. So like an Alexa or like something that you're talking to. Why do we care about that?
Yeah. So this generally goes to an individual's level of trade between privacy and paranoia and what they're wanting in their life. So, each individual should come up with that. And it's also a balance of convenience and privacy and just what sort of lifestyle you want, either in personal life or in your work life. There have been all sorts of really awful situations described of whether baby monitors or other sorts of devices that are supposed to be secure, and the consumer thinks they're secured, and in fact they're not. So depending on your level of care for those sorts of things may help you determine either where you place certain devices, what sorts of devices you have, if you go through extra steps to ensure that they are indeed secure. So if you choose to have any device like that in a place, if you're worried about sensitive conversations or sensitive vantage points, perhaps you've got in the nursery of a small child, for example, you can always do the easy things like change the default password to access these things. There's ways also to ensure that you're routing through secure servers. You may have to pay a little premium to the company that's hosting these things, but there are certainly ways that you can enhance your default security posture. But it probably always comes down to what is an individual comfortable with and what are they willing to put in their home or office. And basically, is it worth the convenience to you based on your own security and privacy posture?
I think what I was getting at with that question is there's so many things that are marketed to us as convenience things, right? We've got those little Ring doorbells, or there's all these things that in theory sound so great and so convenient. And for someone like me, the last thing on my mind is, is someone going to be listening to me, or is someone going to be hacking? And there's so many things that I would never even think that was possible, because that's just not where my mind goes. But it almost seems like a movie, but it is possible. We see, like with the baby monitors getting hacked or different things like that. So I wanted to bring that up just to showcase that like these things are possible. And so whether maybe you haven't even decided what your own personal posture is towards these things. And I wanted to bring it up so you at least start to have that conversation with yourself, with anyone in your household, to understand that like, hey, unfortunately, this is a reality that can happen. And why do we care? And what does that mean? So really anything, whether you have cameras in your home, Wi-Fi enabled devices, do the research or try and learn a little bit more about potentially what could go wrong, and then make that choice yourself.
Yeah, I think that the two attributes that I would at least suggest for folks to consider themselves is, one, be informed, know what it is you're purchasing, and make sure that you're okay with that. And two, try to identify where you are personally or as a corporation on the scale of privacy and paranoia versus convenience. And everybody has a place that they're comfortable with on that. Some people are way to one side and some people are way to the other. But I think the key is knowing where your comfort level is on that scale, and then finding a device or a position in the residence or the commercial location that's consistent with your comfort level. And also, there's probably a third piece, which is, at least for a family, you might say, is ensuring that everyone is aware of what's going on, because you may have individuals that are in different comfort levels. And from the business perspective, you may need a company policy that identifies, or there may even be regulations or statute that prevents it. If you can't have cameras in certain areas, you can't have listening devices in certain areas. And each state tends to have different laws on whether you can record either audio or video or both with or without deliberate consent of the other party. So you need to be very careful if you are doing these things in certain ways, whether it's in the home or in a business.
And I will add that if you are in a medical environment, there are HIPAA privacy rules that you have to be aware of in protecting that data, because if you were to get hacked and patient data was stolen from your practice, that is a HIPAA violation. There are consequences to that. So you've got to inform every single patient that their data, I don't know the exact criteria, but it's a big thing. And I believe there are fines involved.
Yeah. And I think, like everything that we've said today, it's personal views. Everyone has different personal views, but at the end of the day, you really need to contact a professional and understand what the limitations are of whether it's certain technology or certain means of implementing that technology, to include what legal ramifications there may be. You have to do your homework if you want to do this correctly.
Anything else that I'm not asking?
Yeah. So one other item, you talked about email, and we kind of said it's really not secure unless you take a lot of steps to make it secure. Most people don't do that. But you didn't talk about individual file encryption. And so that's another key area. If you are working with files locally on your machine, there may be requirements to have those encrypted for certain types of data. I'm not sure if HIPAA requires it, but that's certainly an area to look at. But that is another way to transfer files in a more secure fashion than just attaching it to an email. Is ensuring that you have a particular file encrypted, and of course, don't send the encryption password in the same email that the file's in.
But would it be like your tax information, right? Like when our CPA sends taxes and it's password protected, are you counting that as being encrypted if it's password?
That's a great example. So taxes have social security numbers and kids information and all sorts of things that you don't necessarily want searchable by your email provider. And you don't necessarily want them to be published on the internet if someone were to intercept that email. So that's a great example of something that you want to perhaps encrypt with a password, and then only share that password with individuals that need access, such as your accountant.
And to do that, that's a free service, right? Like you can encrypt your tax information with a PDF file, right? Or with a...
Well, so the files don't care what's inside. The file types usually can be encrypted. That there's all sorts of software that is free and legitimate. So not all software that is free is necessarily something you want to be using. So step one would be go to a reputable software source, and step two would be try to get a free version if that's important to you. There are all sorts of free software out there that offer many of the same features as your big name paid softwares. And there's probably a whole nother discussion about that. But yes, whether it's a PDF file or a document file or a spreadsheet file, all of those can generally be encrypted with a password. And whether that's a password to just open it, or you could have a separate password to actually make modifications if it's not a read-only file. So there's different layers that you can do that. But I think the important thing to stress is if you have information that you don't want to be necessarily read by anyone that were to intercept that, you should consider encryption. It's perhaps similar to areas all through your life where you don't necessarily want that information just being read by anybody that happens to be holding your mail.
Okay, so no more kids' names and birthday passwords. Encrypt your files, get a password protector. I think and don't get hacked.
Yeah. I guess we got to change our passwords from Stella to something else then.
Yeah. No more Stella passwords. All right, guys, I hope that this helps. I don't want this to scare you or overwhelm you in any way. I just want you to be aware of, some real things that can happen if you're not really making sure that your information is secure. There's a lot of wonderful people out there, but there's also a lot of people that will, try and take advantage of your data and maybe put porn on your website. So we don't want that to happen to you. So please, please, please take the time to really create a system around your computer safety, your computer hygiene, educate yourself. If you have any questions about any of the resources that we use or the softwares that we use, we're more than happy to answer that inside of the Spa Marketing Made Easy Facebook group. Just tag us in there and go change your passwords. All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next episode.